Let's start with what's happening in Iraq and Syria. Yesterday saw 24 airstrikes on Iraq and Syria, or presumably on ISIL in Iraq and Syria. It was a joint missions by British and U.S. air fighters. There are increasing reports of civilian casualties, which of course is inevitable. There is no way you're going to be doing this without civilian casualties, despite the fact that that President Obama promised that we were going to be able to avoid such casualties. And it just speaks to the efficacy of this entire endeavor, leaving aside, of course, the sort of the moral implications. The White House acknowledged for the first time yesterday that the strict standards President Obama ostensibly imposed last year to prevent civilian deaths from U.S. drone strikes will not apply to U.S. military operations in Syria and Iraq.
Surprise, surprise.
This response came in response to reports that as many as a dozen civilians, including women and young children, were killed by a Tomahawk missile strike at the village of Kfar Daryan in Syria's Idlib province. It's happening a week ago. It is supposedly a Nusra Front stronghold. There are more reports of ISIL getting closer and closer to the Turkish border. And we see now the implications of bombing when you don't have any ground forces to fill supposedly the void that is left with the bombing. Kurdish Peshmerga forces in northern Iraq have been able to take over a couple of small towns and some territory in conjunction with the bombing up there, but there's no one to fulfill that role in Syria. Meanwhile, there was a briefing for the House Foreign Affairs Committee at the end of last week, and apparently a political member of the Free Syria Army, Abu Abdo Salabman, said that in that town of Kfar Daryan, he witnessed 7 or 8 ambulances coming out of there carrying bodies out of the rubble of civilians. This was also reinforced by members of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It's a Britain-based organization. They referred to attacks in Manjab, where U.S. forces struck grain silos and other targets in northern and eastern Syria. This happened on Sunday. And on Monday, the Observatory for Human Rights said that it was mainly only civilians that were killed. Workers at the silos, which provide food for people in the area. Manjab, which was the target site, is somewhere between Aleppo in the west of Syria and Kobane, which is a northern town. ISIL forces have been fighting Syrian Kurdish forces there. And, of course, tens of thousands of Syrian Kurds had to flee and headed to Turkey. We're talking about 18 to $22 billion a year now for the airstrikes. This is assuming that we don't go, we don't get more heavily involved in this. Contemplate that number, which is not necessarily huge for a military operation, but 2 or 3 times the amount of money that we've cut, let's say, from food stamps last year. And just to round out the whole thing, you'll be happy to know that Lockheed Martin, Northrop, Raytheon, and General Dynamics, all stock prices are up.